Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Loracecere.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. My name is Loracecere, and I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and I host this podcast weekly, inviting supply chain professionals to share their stories, because I think it's the stories that matter as we try to drive supply chain excellence. Today, I'm interviewing Christian Sautter, and Christian works for Bayer Consumer Products, and he's in supply chain management operations. Christian, welcome to our show.
Morning, Laura. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so tell the group all about yourself. I just gave them the high level, but tell them what you do.
So maybe most importantly, I guess I'm based here in Basel, Switzerland. So that's the headquarters here for Bayer Consumer Health. Despite my very German name, I'm actually American, but I've been here now in Switzerland for almost 10 years. So specifically here at Bayer Consumer Health, so I'm in charge of working with the head of global supply chain management to develop our strategy for the next few years. And as you can imagine, the pandemic has put quite a wrench in the works, and also kind of made sure that we've had to pivot and kind of make sure that we're noticing these trends and sort of adapting as they've come. So it's been an interesting past 2 years, but nonetheless come out a bit wiser and still healthy, thankfully.
Yeah, a couple of years of change has made. So Christian, I had the great opportunity of working with you as a student in my next generation supply chain training. And this was a virtual class and had people from all around the world in different industries, and you were a great student. And you reached back to me to talk to me about the impact of class and how that helped you in the pandemic. Can you share that story and what really spoke to you from the training?
Yeah, of course. I think, before, the class itself, so the cross cohort class was extremely useful in the sense of just understanding what best practice is like for supply chain in various areas, be it from supply chain orchestration or supply chain planning, or trying to build from the outside in and the horizontal processes, and it's great knowledge and, let's say, great theoretical frameworks. And you often would, or I would often go to my managers and try to explain this and talk about it, and everyone said, yeah, it sounds good. But an organization the size of Bayer, to instigate and drive change is extremely difficult, just because of, let's say, the number of layers, the number of people. It's just a large corporation. But a lot of this was really handy in that I had it kind of in my back pocket, so to speak, because when the pandemic came along, supply chain had a much louder voice than, let's say, in years before. And all of a sudden, goods were not arriving on time. We didn't have the visibility that we tended to have, and our global supply chains sort of just kind of the fragility of it all came to the surface. And all of a sudden, you got senior managers who didn't really take much of an interest in supply chain really before, now coming to us and asking us, so what are you doing? How's it working? What can we do to support? And now, over these past 2 years, a lot of these kind of methods and sort of frameworks and ideas have been much more well received, and people are much more interested. And I think that, this has really helped us sort of drive the case for change because we were ready. And again, it's one of these silver linings in an awful time. You just try to take advantage. And thankfully, we've relatively come out somewhat unscathed in terms of supplying the demand that has arisen as a result of the madness that COVID-19 has created.
It's a great story. Can you put your fingers on the framework or the idea that you think was the most impactful from the training that helped you in this kind of step change through the pandemic?
Sure. I mean, there are many. I just try to touch on a few. I think so. Fortunately, the area of risk, I think, is something that's become much more understood within the organization. And we had a risk management organization that tried to encapsulate some of this and sort of put protection measures in place. And then we built on that with some of the SKU or SKU segmentation methodology and saying, okay, today we treat everything, as a one-size-fits-all, and we have a complete lack of understanding of which ones are more important than another. And the SKU segmentation actually allowed us to kind of provide a focus and really deliver the products that mattered both, to customers and also for our bottom line. And similarly, now we've also seen which suppliers are the ones that are really kind of driving that and supporting it. And that's also allowed us to kind of push through now some of the supplier segmentation and kind of take it to the next level. For the procurement organization would tell us that they had something in place, which is true. But I think now we've kind of challenged them to some extent to say, what does the relationship mean between, let's say, this supplier and the other supplier? So I think the segmentation piece has been a real big output. Another one is kind of looking at the inventory. So we can either have, not enough or we have too much. And now we talk a lot more about responsiveness. And so we've really then started to say, okay, how do we manage our inventory, and how do we, do this from a company-wide perspective rather than just a financial or maybe a supply chain operation. And this is really now, because of the attention COVID has brought, we've all got kind of the similar drive to try to drive inventory and make sure that it's not just capital costs, rather that it's there where we need it on the right products, not just for finished goods, but rather even further, upstream into our raw materials and our packaging components, and even looking at some things like vendor managed inventory to some extent. But this all kind of dovetails with the relationship management part of it all. And then, just lastly, just trying to speak the same language, which is somewhat of a soft skill, I think, between the organization, and break down some of these functional silos, because everybody had good intentions, but oftentimes these horizontal objectives kind of were conflicting. And that's one thing that we continually tried to say before the pandemic, that, hey, well, transport's kind of measured on, how many full container loads they can ship. We're trying to, basically ensure that we have the highest service, but in procurement, driving down the suppliers on cost. So now we're sort of trying to understand what are the right trade-offs to kind of say that, what is it that we as Bayer Consumer Health consider to be our future state, and what things do we want to be best in class on, and which ones are we maybe just okay to be kind of the median or the average on.
And how's that journey gone for you in terms of helping people to be more cross-functional, be more definitive in terms of terms, take action? What's that journey been like?
It's been it's been difficult in the sense that you have to start further back than you sometimes think, and you can't assume that everybody knows everything. So a lot of it's also kind of just trying to make sure that we don't go into too much detail. Rather, we explain things from the very beginning, and why we have to do this, and why this is beneficial for the organization, and not just for one individual person or group. That we're all trying to achieve the same collective, let's say, goal, but that it takes everyone to do this. And it's also setting priorities, because I think ultimately we tried to do everything at once, and we couldn't necessarily decide between what was which, or which one was more important, because it's a relative kind of question. But now, through sort of looking at it with quantifiable data, and maybe also the urgencies that COVID has kind of presented, and then also the need to reduce capital costs, we've sort of laid out a roadmap for the next 4 years, with corresponding work streams and then cross-functional groups thereof, which really now have the autonomy and the green light given at a senior management level to say, you're responsible for this, you make the decisions. If you hit a kind of stalemate, you have now the governance and the groups that are responsible to help with the escalation, and also drive decisions along when there are loggerheads. So we finally put something in place, and we've kind of gotten the groundswell that was really required to kind of move it along. And I think that's really been one of the reasons that we've started to make progress now, and hopefully we'll continue to until the next 3-4 years.
Christian, one of the reasons why I stopped the training that you were part of was I got feedback from class members that it was great, but that the education was past their circle of influence, and that all employees have a circle of influence, a circle of concern, and a circle of control, and that they felt that the need to change was really at the leadership level, but that the leaders didn't see the need for change. And so I've struggled with that conundrum, because in my research, I find that education and alignment on next generation supply chain practices is one of the top 3 barriers. So reflect on that. What would be your advice for other companies as you think about that conundrum?
I think the best way to kind of look at it is, now there is just so much to kind of juggle, and it doesn't matter where you sit. If you're at the senior management level, or if you're, let's say, working in a factory or on the shop floor, I mean, you can break it down into a couple buckets in a sense, and it doesn't matter which you look at, but they kind of all seem to kind of be mixed together in one pot. So you have things like macroeconomic trends. So what kind of geopolitical shifts are now happening, especially with the United States and with China? What about the regulatory impacts that are coming through now? So, I mean, during COVID, we saw that the Indian government blocked the export of paracetamol, and we couldn't get paracetamol into our sites. And unfortunately, due to some of the resiliency efforts we had in place, we'd already qualified second suppliers. So we were in good shape, thankfully. But now you see, Kodak in the United States, about a year or so ago, getting government funds to build up more factories because the weakness and the reliance on India and China for a lot of these materials has been now made crystal clear that no one can ignore it any longer. And we have to kind of also see how the governments will kind of manage this, because now it's sort of, well, what will the landscape look like? It's not predictable any longer. As I said before, the fragility of it all has been exposed. Additionally, you have things like the sustainability topics, where it's not any longer kind of a marketing thing or maybe a do-good or corporate social responsibility issue, but now it's really a license to operate. So we really have to sort of look through the lens of, okay, how do we manage to continue supply continuity, but also become more green and maybe more sustainable? And then the other things like social media and transparency, not to mention all the technology pieces that come along with it, like big data and AI and Internet of Things. So there's just a complete mess of all these different things that are coming together that I think everybody's trying to make sense of. And because of that, in the sense that we have these frameworks that were taught within the cross-company cohort class that you taught, we have some kind of game plans and solutions. They are ready to help address some of these topics. I mean, they require trade-offs. They require some mindfulness and sensitivity in which ones we want to go for first and which ones later. But we at least have a kind of game plan, and I think people now are much more receptive in this environment to take that chance and go forward in a little bit more of a bold way than they were before.
Well, excellent. I guess my last question, Christian, I visited you in Basel. It was a great breakfast, and then I had the opportunity to observe you with your team. And you're relatively young, but I'm very impressed with your building of influence management skills in the organization. And I was wondering if you'd spend a little bit of time talking to others that are, at a similar spot trying to drive change in an organization about the steps that they should take.
Yeah, I think honestly, for me, as an American working in another country, one thing, and married to somebody that's also from another country, I learned a lot more about German culture. And, working for a big German company, you realize that the German culture is kind of pervasive in the way that everybody works. And they're very, let's say, and this is very general, but I think that the company is very focused on processes and also focused on, the details specifically from a number standpoint, which can sometimes be difficult to arrive at. But I think the essence of something simple like storytelling is really, it's really kind of a basic and almost fundamental tool that I think most people, irrespective of where you're from, can sort of relate to. And I think telling the story and making sure that it sort of is sensible and also is addressing a problem, and then also kind of helping arrive at a solution in a way it's not complicated, that doesn't use any technical jargon, but just kind of help people understand the case for change and how to get there and what we all need to do as an organization collectively is really one of these kind of intangibles that I think are sometimes lost. And I think that especially can be true with supply chain when you have a lot of engineers and a lot of people with really technical backgrounds that, who know really how the entire business works probably better than most. Just being able to tell that story in a way that people that aren't, close to the detail or in the weeds, so to speak, can understand is really what I've seen as the most valuable part. So I wouldn't say that I'm anywhere near the smartest person in the room, but I've figured out how to maybe tell a story in a way that I think people can relate to, and that also maybe builds that initial case for change.
Can you give us an example of something that you've done in that area, a story that you've told, or, how you've been able to make that shift?
I think the first thing maybe is probably around the SKU segmentation part. And then ultimately supplier segmentation. And it's sometimes having difficult discussions with people that kind of maybe don't necessarily always agree with you. So, for example, it's difficult to look at a country or a particular product and kind of tell somebody that, hey, this isn't really important in the overall scheme of things. And ultimately, the first reaction is never necessarily positive, especially if it's one that you manage. But when you can kind of come away from it in a sense and kind of try to step away from it and not take it so personally and share the data in a kind of calm way, but also explain that nothing comes for free in the sense that to produce this small SKU or to produce this, keep this small supplier, here's the cost of people, here's the cost of the time, here's the cost of complexity, and this is ultimately impacting our ability to deliver on the bigger and the more profitable things. Not to mention reduces our ability to kind of hit our launches, which are coming down the R&D pipeline on time, because we just have this immensely complex portfolio, and immensely complex supplier network. So it's really trying to also start initially and just explain it very, very generally, and also just to make sure that it's never me versus you. It's rather us. It's kind of at least the kind of tone that I've tried to shape. And oftentimes I feel like people will initially maybe be resentful, or they will be a little bit, let's say, unreceptive. But ultimately, it may take 2 or 3 discussions. And so long as you can remain somewhat lighthearted and not try to take anything too personally, I feel like it usually tends to work out.
I love that advice. I wish that you had given that advice to the young Loracecere, because I was like, what do you mean you don't understand this, right? It was so clear to me, right? And, I think it's hard to not take things personally. And often people in the commercial teams are angry because they can't get product, or, their customers can't see what the available to promise is, and they can't understand how supply chain can be so screwed up, and you're working hard, right?
Mm-hmm, that's right. Yeah, I never said I never took anything personally. I tried to, but I'm getting there, So.
If you had given that advice to the young Loracecere, it would have been a great gift, because you fight so hard, you work so hard, and, you're like, what about this can they not understand? But it's a totally different perspective. And yeah. I think the art of storytelling and the need for humor in interactions, I think those are important skills that I wish we would teach young professionals. Well,
I was, not to interrupt, just to supplement what you say quickly, is really empathy, and humor. I think more so is just to try to understand the other's perspective and not try to force yours on the other. And I think once you kind of understand the other side, or someone's being in the other shoes, you come a lot further along.
Well, I look forward to seeing your career progression, because I think that's great wisdom. And I look forward to working with you in the Project Zebra training and getting your feedback on outside-in processes. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you.
Anything you want to close with?
No, I think maybe just that I really appreciate your having me here, and I do look forward to working with you as well. And I really wouldn't be in this position had it not been for you and your class. So again, I can't thank you enough for all these tools, and I was just very lucky to be in the right place at the right time and to have taken good notes. So thank you again for putting it all together and having me.
It's my pleasure. It warms my heart. So this is Loracecere with Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. Today we're interviewing Christian from Bayer Consumer Products and his reflections on the Supply Chain Insights cross-functional cohort that actually happened 3 years ago, and how he used the information during the pandemic. Thank you, Christian, and all the best in your success.
Thank you, Laura.